Hello everyone. Today I would like to share with everyone my story, which I would not wish on anyone. I hope for your feedback and reactions. For a logical understanding, I have divided my story into sections. Chapter 1: Meeting and Early Relationship. It's hard to believe that everything that's happened started from such a simple and beautiful beginning. I still find myself asking how we got here, how things turned so completely upside down. But before I get ahead of myself, let me take you back to the start of it all, to when everything seemed so perfect. I met Jennifer, let's call her Jennifer for the sake of the story, when I was 22 years old, still a little naive, and with big ideas about what love was supposed to look like. It was at a wedding, of all places. My best friend was getting married, and I had the honor of being a groomsman. Jennifer was a close friend of the bride, and when our friends planned the seating arrangement, they couldn't resist trying to play matchmaker. We were seated at the same table, a perfect pairing in their eyes, and I suppose they were right. Sparks flew almost immediately. From the moment I laid eyes on her, I was captivated. Jennifer was one of those rare people who could walk into a room and instantly make it feel brighter. There was an energy about her, a lightness and grace that drew people in. She wasn't just pretty. She was breathtaking, the kind of woman whose beauty you couldn't ignore even if you tried. And let me tell you, I wasn't trying to ignore it. We started talking, and it felt so easy. You know when you meet someone and the conversation flows without effort? That was us. We had so much in common, it felt surreal. We both loved hiking and spending time outdoors. We both had a wicked sense of humor, and we even shared similar tastes in music and movies. It felt like the universe had put us together on purpose. There was no awkwardness, no uncertainty, just pure connection. I remember thinking to myself that this might be the start of something incredible. After dinner, we hit the dance floor together. The music played, and we couldn't help but laugh as we tried to keep up with the rhythm, but the whole thing felt effortless, like we were in sync without even trying. We spent the rest of the night dancing, talking, and stealing glances. There was something magical about the way we kept looking at each other, as though we knew something no one else did. At some point, we shared a kiss, just a quick one, but it felt like time stood still in that moment. Our friends, the bride and groom, noticed the chemistry right away. They came rushing over, grinning from ear to ear, asking what was going on between us. We just shrugged it off, laughing, and kept enjoying the night. It felt like the start of something straight out of a romantic comedy, the kind of thing that only happens in movies. But when the night came to an end, we parted ways without exchanging phone numbers. I remember feeling a little disappointed, kicking myself for not asking for hers. Little did I know, Jennifer was thinking the same thing. About a week later, I received a text from her. It was simple. "Hey, want to grab a coffee sometime?" Turns out, our mutual friend, the bride, had given her my number, and I couldn't have been happier. I immediately said yes, and we made plans to meet up. That coffee date turned into something much more. It was like we were picking up where we left off, only this time, we were alone, and the connection was even stronger. We talked for hours, barely noticing the time as it flew by. Before we knew it, we were seeing each other regularly, and everything just fell into place. It wasn't like other relationships where things feel forced or uncertain. With Jennifer, everything felt easy, natural. We fit together like two puzzle pieces that had been waiting to be joined. Of course, like any couple, we had our disagreements, small things, silly arguments that didn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. But those moments were rare. We didn't fight about big issues. It was clear that we cared about each other deeply, and when something came up, we always managed to work through it together. I began to think that maybe this was it, the person I was meant to be with for the rest of my life. 2 years into dating, I knew I wanted to marry her. I couldn't imagine spending my life with anyone else. So, I started planning the proposal. Looking back, it was probably a bit much. Grand gestures, a surprise dinner, an elaborate speech, but it was worth it when I saw her face light up as I asked her to be my wife. She said yes, of course, and from that moment, everything felt perfect. We planned the wedding, and less than a year later, we were standing before our closest friends and family, exchanging vows. At the time, I honestly believed we were the perfect couple. We had everything anyone could want: a beautiful relationship, a growing future, and the love and support of our families. We were happy, and it felt like nothing could come between us. Looking back now, I see how naive I was, how blind I was to the cracks that were starting to form beneath the surface. But at the time, everything seemed flawless. Jennifer and I had built something beautiful together. We were young, but we had big dreams and big plans. I was convinced that our love would stand the test of time. After all, how could it not? We had everything going for us. What could possibly go wrong? Little did I know that everything I thought I knew about love and trust would soon be turned upside down. But that's a story for another chapter. In those early days, it felt like we were invincible. We had the kind of love you read about in books: spontaneous, passionate, easy. It was everything I had ever wanted and more. It seemed like we had a future full of endless possibilities ahead of us. But, as we all know, things are never quite as perfect as they seem. The signs were there, though I didn't see them then. I was so wrapped up in the dream of us, in the idea of our future, that I couldn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. For now, I'm just holding on to the memory of those early days, when everything felt like it was meant to be. I can only wonder now if that was the real thing, or just a version of love I wanted to believe in. A version of love that, in the end, wasn't as solid as I thought. Chapter 2: Marriage and Initial Problems. For the first year of our marriage, everything appeared to be going smoothly. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Life settled into a comfortable routine, and we were doing all the usual newlywed things: setting up our home, hosting small dinner parties for friends, and even talking about the future, about possibly starting a family someday. We shared our dreams, our hopes for the years ahead, and everything seemed perfect. If you had asked me back then, I would have confidently told you that we were incredibly happy. But looking back, I can see that cracks had already begun to form in our relationship, even if I didn't notice them at the time. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. Little things that I tried to brush off, until, eventually, they became hard to ignore. It all began around the time of our first anniversary, when Jennifer's behavior shifted. At first, I thought it was just stress from her job, or maybe a bit of burnout from the excitement of the wedding and settling into married life. But soon, the changes became more noticeable, and they were things that didn't feel quite right. One of the first signs was how protective she became over her phone. Jennifer had always been the type to leave her phone lying around the house without a second thought. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't check her phone, and I trusted her completely. But suddenly, she started keeping it with her at all times, even bringing it into the bathroom with her. It might seem like a small thing, but it felt like a red flag. Why was she suddenly so guarded? What was she hiding? Then came the girls' nights. I've never had a problem with Jennifer spending time with her friends. In fact, I encouraged it. It's healthy for both of us to have our own space and social lives outside of the relationship. But these girls' nights began to happen more and more often. At first, they were just an occasional thing, nothing to worry about. But then it became a regular occurrence, and these nights out stretched longer and longer into the evening. Sometimes, she wouldn't come home until late, and when she did, she would smell faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. She'd offer vague explanations about what they had done, saying things like, "We just had a late dinner," or "We went to a club to dance." When I asked for more details, she would wave it off with a dismissive comment, telling me that I was being overly suspicious and that I needed to trust her more. What really bothered me, though, was the lack of transparency. I didn't want to accuse her of anything. After all, we were married, and trust was supposed to be the foundation of our relationship. But these little inconsistencies started to eat away at my peace of mind. I started to feel like there was more to her behavior than she was letting on, but when I tried to bring it up, I was always told that I was imagining things. She insisted that I was just insecure, and that I needed to stop worrying so much. Our physical relationship also began to suffer. Before we got married, we had an active and passionate sex life. We couldn't keep our hands off each other, and I thought it was normal that we were just really in tune with one another. But over the months, it seemed like Jennifer had completely lost interest. Weeks would go by without any kind of physical affection. When I tried to bring it up, she would brush me off with comments like, "I'm just tired," or "You're overthinking this, it's not a big deal." Her excuses always seemed reasonable, and at first, I convinced myself that I was just being needy or expecting too much. But the more it happened, the more I realized something was wrong. The hardest part was that whenever I tried to express how I was feeling, Jennifer didn't seem to care. I remember sitting her down one evening, trying to have a serious conversation about how I felt distant from her. I told her that it seemed like she was pulling away, that our connection wasn't the same anymore, but she just rolled her eyes and brushed me off. "You're letting your insecurities get to you," she said dismissively. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Her words stung, but even worse was the total lack of effort on her part to address my concerns. It was as if my feelings didn't matter to her, like I was just some overbearing husband who was trying to control her. It made me question myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I overreacting? Maybe I was just imagining things. After all, Jennifer was always calm and confident when she dismissed my worries. But the more I thought about it, the more something inside me felt off. My instincts were telling me that there was something deeper going on, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As the weeks went by, I found myself growing increasingly distant. If Jennifer wasn't willing to put any effort into fixing things, why should I? I stopped giving her the small, loving gestures that used to come naturally. I didn't give her a goodbye kiss when I left for work in the morning anymore. It seemed trivial, but it was a small part of our daily routine that I had always cherished. Instead, we would exchange the bare minimum of words, usually just practical stuff like, "I'll be home late tonight," or "Don't forget to pay the bills." Anything that wasn't related to our day-to-day lives felt unnecessary, and I stopped trying to engage her in deeper conversations. The atmosphere in our home grew colder with each passing day. I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone who barely acknowledged my presence. I spent more and more time in my home office, burying myself in work to avoid thinking about how far apart we had drifted. But even then, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that our marriage was slowly falling apart. I had no idea how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed. I didn't want to believe that something so important could just slip away without any warning, but it was hard to ignore the growing distance between us. Looking back now, I can see that this was the beginning of the end. The foundation of our marriage was slowly crumbling, but I didn't fully realize it at the time. All I knew was that something was terribly wrong, and I felt powerless to do anything about it. There were no obvious signs of infidelity or betrayal, at least, not yet, but the cracks in our relationship were starting to show, and I couldn't pretend that everything was fine any longer. I was stuck in this limbo, unsure of where we were headed or if we could get back to where we once were. Chapter 3. Suspicion and Investigation. There is a point in every person's life when instinct screams that something is wrong. I had reached that point. Jennifer's dismissive attitude, her increasingly secretive behavior, and the emotional distance between us had created a storm of doubt in my mind. I hated feeling like a paranoid fool, but every fiber of my being told me I could not just let this slide. One evening, I made the decision to find out the truth, no matter what it took. It was late, and Jennifer had already gone to bed. I stood in the hallway outside our room for what felt like an eternity, wrestling with my conscience. I knew what I was about to do was invasive. Checking someone's private messages is not exactly honorable. But I had tried every other route. Conversations, trust, patience. None of it had worked, and now I was at the end of my rope. I quietly entered our bedroom, careful not to wake her. Her phone was on the nightstand, and I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. My hand shook as I unlocked it, using the passcode I had memorized months ago without her knowledge. As I began scrolling through her texts, emails, and messenger apps, my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might wake her. But there was nothing. No suspicious texts. No strange emails. Nothing that hinted at an affair or betrayal. For a brief moment, I felt relief. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I really was just being insecure, like she kept saying. But then a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me that Jennifer was smart. Smarter than to leave a digital trail on her primary devices. That voice was what led me to check her car. I had read enough stories online about hidden second phones to know it was worth a shot. Grabbing her keys, I slipped outside into the cool night air. Her car sat in the driveway, its interior illuminated by the faint glow of a nearby streetlight. I opened the driver's door and began searching every compartment, the glove box, the center console, under the seats. And then I found it. Tucked away in a small pocket behind the passenger seat was a second phone. My breath caught in my throat as I held it in my hands, the realization crashing over me like a wave. This was it, the proof I had been dreading, but also needing. I brought the phone inside, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. The password was easy to guess. Jennifer often reused combinations she thought were clever but memorable. Once inside, I was greeted by a single contact and a long chain of messages. My stomach churned as I began reading. The texts were explicit, filled with flirtation, secret plans to meet, and photos that made my blood boil. There was no room for doubt anymore. Jennifer was having an affair. I did not even need to know the other person's identity yet. The content of the messages was enough to shatter any remaining illusions I had about our marriage. But I was not about to confront her unprepared. I needed evidence, something concrete that she could not wriggle her way out of with excuses or lies. I connected the second phone to my computer and spent the entire night downloading and printing every message and photo. The process felt mechanical, like I was running on autopilot. Anger and heartbreak bubbled beneath the surface, but I pushed those feelings aside. I would deal with them later. As the printer churned out page after page of evidence, I opened my laptop and began researching divorce lawyers. My search led me to several promising candidates, and I spent hours reading their profiles and reviews, trying to find someone I felt I could trust with what was about to be the most painful process of my life. When I finally chose one, I drafted an email explaining my situation and attached a few examples of the evidence I had gathered. It was a Saturday, so I did not expect an immediate response, but sending the email felt like taking the first step toward regaining control of my life. By the time the sun rose, I was physically and emotionally drained. But I had my evidence, and I had a plan. Jennifer would not be able to deny what she had done, and I would make sure she faced the consequences. Chapter 4. Discovery of Infidelity. The rest of that weekend felt like an eternity. After finding the second phone and its damning contents, I could not stop obsessing over the details. Every message I had read, every photo I had seen, replayed in my mind like a torturous loop. My focus was razor-sharp, though, as I buried myself in my laptop, scrolling through bios of divorce lawyers. I needed someone sharp, experienced, and ruthless. Someone who would ensure I did not walk away from this with even more damage than Jennifer had already caused. I finally found a lawyer whose reputation seemed to align with what I needed. Their client reviews described a compassionate yet no-nonsense approach, and that was exactly what I wanted. Without hesitation, I sent them an email detailing my situation and attaching a few select screenshots of the evidence. It was cathartic, in a way, to put everything in writing, to lay out my case for someone who could help me dismantle the disaster that had become my life. But even as I tried to plan my next steps, one question loomed over me like a dark cloud. Who was the man she was cheating with? The number in her secret phone was just that, a number. No name, no context, no face. That uncertainty gnawed at me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. I decided to take a more direct approach. Grabbing my own phone, I typed the mysterious number into the dial pad. My plan was simple but effective. I would pretend to be a representative from a well-known internet provider, Spectrum, and see if the person on the other end would reveal their identity. It was a long shot, but I figured most people would assume a random call from their service provider was legitimate. Before I could even finish typing the number, though, my phone betrayed me. The contact information for the number automatically filled in. It was Jay, my so-called friend. The realization hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. It was not just some faceless stranger. It was Jay, the same Jay who had been at countless gatherings, who had shared drinks and laughs with me, who had been a part of my life for years. And then, the anger erupted. I slammed my phone onto the desk, my chest heaving as rage poured out of me in a way I had never experienced before. I yelled, cursed, and slammed my fists on the desk. The betrayal, the humiliation, it was all too much to bear. How could they do this to me? How could Jennifer, the woman I had loved and married, and Jay, someone I had trusted, conspire to destroy everything we had built? The commotion must have been loud enough to carry through the house because moments later, the door to my office creaked open. Jennifer stood there, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. "Are you okay?" she asked tentatively. Her voice, so familiar, so calm, only fueled my anger. I turned to her, my face flushed and my hands trembling. "Get out," I said, my voice low and cold. "What?" she asked, taking a hesitant step forward. "Get out!" I bellowed, my voice rising to a volume I had never used with her before. "Get out of my office! Now!" Jennifer stared at me, stunned. In all the years we had been together, I had never yelled at her, never even raised my voice. But there was no going back now. She had crossed an unforgivable line, and I was done pretending everything was fine. Without another word, she backed out of the room and closed the door. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall and into our bedroom, the door shutting softly behind her. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The silence that followed was deafening, but it gave me the space I needed to start formulating my plan. Jennifer and Jay might think they had the upper hand, that their secret was safe, but they were wrong. I would make sure of it. Chapter 5. Seeking legal help. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of urgency. The previous night's events, the anger, the shock, everything was still fresh in my mind, but I knew I had to focus on the next step, securing my future. I had already taken the first step by gathering all the evidence I could find, and now it was time to meet with a lawyer. As I was getting ready to leave, I saw Jennifer sitting at the kitchen table. She had made breakfast, the smell of eggs and bacon filling the air. Despite everything, there she was, acting as though nothing had changed, as though everything was still fine between us. "Hey," she said softly, glancing up from her phone. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a moment before nodding, knowing that I couldn't avoid the conversation forever, but I wasn't ready to deal with her just yet. I sat down at the table and made a small plate for myself, trying to keep my distance emotionally while my mind raced. "I've noticed you've been acting strange lately," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "You've been distant. You don't kiss me goodbye anymore. You don't talk to me like you used to. What's going on?" I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing the truth. Instead, I brushed it off as best as I could. "Work's been stressful," I said flatly. "It's been hard to keep up, but it's almost over. I'll be fine." She frowned, clearly not buying it. "But this isn't just about work, is it?" she pressed, leaning forward. "I feel like you're hiding something from me." I kept my expression neutral. I didn't owe her an explanation, not after everything I had uncovered. I stood up, pushing my plate aside. "I've got to go," I said curtly. She stared at me, watching me with a mixture of confusion and frustration. But I didn't have the energy to deal with her anymore. I walked out of the kitchen without another word, grabbing my keys on the way out. Once in my car, the weight of everything I had discovered pressed down on me. The lawyer's office wasn't far, and I counted down the minutes until I would finally have a chance to discuss my options with someone who could actually help me. My thoughts were racing, replaying every moment with Jennifer, every lie, every ounce of betrayal. When I arrived at my office, I quickly told my assistant that I had a lunch meeting with a client and needed to leave for a bit. My assistant nodded, as she always did, and I headed straight for the lawyer's office. The meeting with the lawyer went better than I had expected. I walked into his office with a thick folder containing all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past few days. Printouts of the messages, photos, everything that would prove Jennifer's infidelity. As I handed the folder over to him, I could feel a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was the moment where things would start to change. The lawyer took a long look through the materials before looking back at me. "I'm really sorry for what you're going through," he said, his tone sympathetic but professional. "But I'm glad you've gathered so much information. It's going to be really useful for the case." I nodded, feeling numb. I had been so consumed by the anger and betrayal that it hadn't quite sunk in what was happening. My life was about to change forever, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it yet. He continued, his words a bit of a relief in the midst of all the chaos. "We live in an at-fault state," he explained. "Because your wife's actions can be proven, she has very little claim on your assets. That includes your home, any savings, and most of your personal property. You're in a strong position." That news was a small comfort, though it didn't completely erase the bitterness that filled me. It felt like I was taking steps toward a new chapter, but part of me still couldn't shake the betrayal. I stayed at the lawyer's office for a while longer, discussing the next steps in the divorce process. The more we talked, the more I realized how much I had been taken for granted, how much I had ignored. It was like a fog had been lifted, and I was starting to see everything clearly, too clearly. But no matter how much I wanted to focus on the future, the past kept pulling me back in. I had to get away from it. I had to keep moving forward. As I left the office, the finality of everything hit me. I had taken the first big step toward ending my marriage, but now the real work would begin. I just hoped that by the time everything was over, I'd be able to look back without anger, without resentment. But right now, all I felt was the need to make sure Jennifer paid for what she had done. And that would start with the divorce papers. Chapter 6. Confrontation with the wife. It was only about 15 minutes later when she finally showed up at the door, her face a mix of confusion and concern, but I could tell she was trying to act like nothing was wrong. As she walked in, I couldn't help but stare at her, trying to suppress the fury that was building up inside me. It took all my strength to keep my voice steady as I looked at her, coldly stating, "Wow, 15 minutes. That's about the same time it would take to drive from here to Jay's place, isn't it? She froze, her eyes widening with disbelief. It was the kind of reaction I had been expecting, the kind that told me I had hit a nerve. She couldn't find the words to respond at first, and I allowed her a moment to collect herself. But there was no denying it now. The truth was out, and I was done with the lies. She just stared at me, mouth slightly open, but no words coming out. The silence between us stretched on, and I finally broke it, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Well? Nothing to say? That was all it took. She tried to backpedal, stumbling over her words, and immediately went into full damage control mode, denying everything. She even tried to gaslight me, claiming I was overreacting or that I was imagining things. Her excuses were as empty as her promises, and I wasn't buying any of it. I let her ramble on, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. At that point, I had enough. I slammed my fist down on the table, the force of the impact shocking us both into silence. It was a moment of pure rage, of years of pent-up frustration and hurt that I couldn't hold back any longer. I looked her in the eyes, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief, but determined to make her face the truth. "I've got something for you," I said through gritted teeth, reaching for the folder of evidence I had carefully collected. She looked at me with confusion, not yet realizing what was coming. I slowly pulled out the first printout, holding it to the side to tease her, letting her wonder just what was about to hit her. "You think you've gotten away with it? You think I don't know what you've been up to?" I asked, my voice steady but filled with venom. Then, one by one, I showed her each printout, each message, each photo, laying out the evidence of her betrayal for her to see. It felt like a sickening victory, watching her face shift from shock to guilt to desperation, as each new piece of evidence hit her harder than the last. She tried to deny it again, but I wasn't having it. "Stop," I said, my tone final. She broke down into tears, apologizing, begging for my forgiveness. She tried to tell me she loved me, her voice shaky, but it was too little too late. I stood there, looking at her as she cried, her tears doing nothing to soften the ice that had formed around my heart. I had seen her act so callous, so cruel, and now she was trying to play the victim. She was trying to make me feel sorry for her after everything she had done. With a sarcastic chuckle, I asked, "What happened to that energy you had earlier? You were so quick to degrade and insult me, to make me feel worthless, just a minute ago. What happened to that?" She tried to hug me, reaching out in an attempt to make amends, to somehow undo the damage she had caused. But I stepped back, holding my hand out to stop her, the look in my eyes telling her everything she needed to know. "Don't touch me," I said, my voice firm. The anger and hurt I had been suppressing for so long finally broke through. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to just erase everything you've done." She tried to sweet-talk me, begging me to go to the bedroom and do whatever I liked, but it wasn't enough. I looked her straight in the eyes, feeling the depth of my disdain for her. "I will never touch you again," I said, my voice cold, my words final. Then I pulled out the final blow. "Do you want to know who else has these photos and messages? My lawyer. I'm divorcing you. Now! Get a bag, gather your things, and get the hell out of my house." Her face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock as the reality of the situation finally set in. She was no longer in control, no longer the one calling the shots. The life she had tried to build on lies was crumbling before her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I didn't care about the tears, the apologies, or the hollow promises. It was over. She had crossed a line, and now she had to face the consequences. And for once, I felt a sense of power, of control, that I hadn't felt in a long time. Chapter 7. Aftermath and Reflection. It's been 3 days since I told her to leave, And honestly, it still feels like everything is happening in a blur. I haven't heard a single word from her since that day. The silence is almost deafening, but at the same time, I can't say it feels like a relief. In some way, it feels like the calm before the storm, the heavy weight of everything that's happened still hanging over me. I spent the first couple of days, after everything went down, going through the motions, trying to distract myself with work and keeping busy. But it's hard to avoid the reality of what just happened. I'm living in a house that's been shattered by betrayal, and every corner of it reminds me of her, of the life we were supposed to have, the future we planned. Now, I'm just left with the mess she left behind, and it's tough to wrap my mind around it all. The first night after she left, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened, everything I had discovered, and every part of our life together that felt like a lie. It's still hard for me to fully process the fact that the woman I married, the person I trusted more than anyone, could do something like this. The betrayal cuts deep, and even though I'm angry, there's still a part of me that's in shock. How could I not see the signs? How did I let it go on this long without doing something sooner? I keep going back to the conversations we had before everything imploded, how she'd brushed off my concerns, how she would always tell me I was overthinking, or letting my insecurities get the best of me. I wonder how much of it was her just lying to my face, how much of it was me ignoring the signs because I didn't want to believe what was happening. I feel like a fool for not seeing the truth sooner, but at the same time, I wonder if I just didn't want to. I wanted to believe in our relationship, in the life we built, but now all of that is shattered. I've been trying to figure out what to do next, what the future holds for me. The thought of moving on feels like it's too soon, too raw. The idea of dating again, of trusting someone else, seems impossible. But at the same time, I know I can't stay in this limbo forever. I can't live in this house, with these memories, and just pretend everything is fine. I don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks or months. Will she reach out? Will she try to apologize, beg for forgiveness, and beg me to take her back? Or is she just gone from my life for good? I honestly don't know what to expect, but I can't spend all my energy worrying about it. It's strange, but there's also this strange sense of freedom that comes with the aftermath. As angry as I am, as hurt as I feel, I know that I made the right choice by confronting her and ending the relationship. It's hard to imagine a future without her, but at the same time, I can't keep holding on to someone who treated me like this. I have to move forward, even if I'm not sure what that looks like just yet. I've shared this here because, honestly, I don't know where else to turn. I'm trying to make sense of everything, and I'm curious to hear from anyone who has been through something similar. What can I expect from here? What should I do next? How do I move on from something this big? Any advice, or even just someone else's experience, would really help me make sense of this and take the next steps. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I really appreciate it.